Good morning, folks. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. This is our weekly hearing. It is Wednesday, July 13th, 2022. It is 9 o'clock. Let's have a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Bogue. Commissioner Cross.
Present.
Commissioner McGowan. Here. Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 5 out of 7 commissioners present.
Thank you. Our first agenda item today is commissioner comments. I have a few comments. Does anybody else have comments for the good of the cause? Commissioner Messner.
Yeah, I'd just like to welcome Commissioners Cross and Commissioners Ackerman. I think this is maybe the first time that they're on screen as new seated commissioners, and so excited to work with you both.
Yes, indeed. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I wanted to read some comments about a letter that we received and that the state received from Governor Polis yesterday. On July 12th, Governor Polis released a letter urging state agencies, including our agency and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, CDPHE, to take additional steps to improve air quality for Coloradans. As part of this announcement, the governor urged CDPHE and our commission to take steps to do a few things. One, improve air permit modeling, the permitting process on oil and gas emissions reporting, to evaluate cumulative impacts, and to improve collaboration between COGCC and APCD. The governor specifically asked CDPHE and COGCC to improve the competitiveness of Colorado's business and enhance the quality of Colorado's air. I want to share those action items that involve our agency for our stakeholders that are listening in. By July 1 of 2024, COGCC, in consultation with the Air Pollution Control Division, should submit a report describing the permitting processes of each of the two agencies, including how those processes interact and how the two departments collaborate. That report may include increased resource suggestions and proposed statutory or regulatory changes to their processes to consider improving the business environment, reducing paperwork, reducing costs, and the cumulative impacts in permitting of oil and gas facilities. And then secondly, the Commission and CDPHE's Air Pollution Control Division should work together continuously to evaluate their collaboration and shared processes to identify opportunities for improvement or efficiency. I would note that the governor's letter concludes with a commendation to COGCC staff and commissioners for their continued service. As former director and now chair, I am proud of the strong working relationship between CDPHE and COGCC, and we look forward to working together to implement these new efforts to protect public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources, and to be a collaborative partner on efforts that involve oil and gas to improve the air quality for all of Colorado. I would note for everybody that the governor's press release and letter will be posted to our commission website for those who wish to see the letter in its entirety. So that happened yesterday, and you should all have copies of that in your inbox, and again, it will be posted to the website. Those were my comments. Others with comments? All right, we did not have any members of the public sign up for public comment, so we do not have public comment. We do have a consent agenda. There are 4 items on consent agenda. Does anybody have any questions with regard to consent? Seeing no questions, do we have a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve consent. Is there further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right. The next matter on our agenda is
Mr. Chair, it's hard to hear you when you face down.
sorry. I'll put my agenda in front of me and speak into the mic. Appreciate that. Next item on the agenda is PCR Operating LLC docket number 2011-00264. AAG Davenport, do you want to speak to this, or should I just move forward with the motion? You want to set the framework at all?
Sure, I'll give a very brief explanation of what's happening. This is a commission action pursuant to a resolution we reached in litigation, a judicial review action with PCR. The commission last October entered a default order against PCR. PCR brought a judicial review action, and the commission's action today is pursuant to resolution in that judicial review action.
Very good. I would encourage a motion to vacate order number 1V769 and underlying proceedings subsequent to the issuance and service of the 4 NOAVs, which were the subject of the order. This motion should acknowledge that COGCC staff and PCR have a dispute regarding service of the NOAVs, and the motion does not resolve that dispute. So that's the motion I'm encouraging.
So move.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, moving forward, we now will take up docket number 2203-00062, Abilene Perfect Energy JV LLC. And I believe we've got Mr. Lindley.
Good morning, commissioners. For certain commissioners, you saw me in June during my first appearance before the commission. For the new commissioners, I was asked to provide additional outreach, providing Abilene Perfect Energy with additional notification for this proceeding. The steps previously taken to notify Abilene followed COGCC rules to notify an operator of an enforcement proceeding. However, at the commission's direction, on July 5th, additional attempts were made to contact all of Abilene's listed email addresses and phone numbers. As of today, I have not heard anything in response. Further, Abilene's status with the Colorado Secretary of State has been delinquent since January 1, 2017, which is the same year Abilene stopped production reporting for their 2 wells. Unless the commission has any further questions, staff is asking that you approve order 1V-792 and docket number 2203-00062.
Thank you, Mr. Lindley. AAG Davenport, do you want to speak to the fact that 3 of us heard this before, 2 of us did not, and what we ought to be doing with regard to that set of facts?
Sure. So as the commissioners are aware, this matter is a continuation of a hearing that was held prior to Commissioners Ackerman and Cross joining the commission. If either commissioner feels it is appropriate to recuse themselves from this matter and not participate in the vote, then this would be the appropriate time to do that.
I believe it's appropriate to recuse myself, having not been part of the previous discussions.
Yeah, I would agree. We'll also recuse.
Okay, recusals accepted. That leaves the matter pending before the remaining commissioners. Does any commissioner have any questions of Mr. Lindley at this point, or do we have a motion? Commissioner McGowan?
No questions, but I'm appreciative of staff's extra outreach. I think that it shows that we crossed all the possible T's and dotted all the possible I's, and it's clear that the operator's MIA. And so I would support a motion to, what would the motion be? I would support.
I think it's a motion to approve the order finding violation.
Motion to support the order of finding violation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Lindley, thank you very much. We do appreciate the additional work on this and think that we've perfected the record here appropriately with regard to this operator. Look forward to hearing from you as we move forward with our work. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, moving right along, we now will move to docket number 2203-00043. This involves Simcoe LLC, and it involves the Tiffany number 5 oil and gas development plan. And I believe that we've got Ms. Fulcher that needs to be brought to the panel to make a presentation. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, commissioners. Would you allow us just maybe 1 or 2 minutes? We are very ahead of schedule and I want to make sure we've got everybody up and ready.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry about our efficiencies.
Not a problem. And we're happy to go earlier. I just want to make sure everyone's with us. So bear with us just for a minute here.
Just give me a thumbs up when you've got everybody that you need.
Sounds good. Don't take this as the thumbs up. I'll give you another one.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Chair, I believe we have Ms. Blanchard here, and if Ms. Larson can make sure that Kyle Kerr is elevated to a panelist as well, and I see him. And Amanda, if you want to go ahead and begin your share screen, we'll get going. All right. Amanda's working on the share screen. Perfect. Thanks, Amanda. All right, we'll get moving here. It looks like everybody can see that. I can see it on my end. And I want to just begin by saying good morning to the commissioners. Good morning, Mr. Chair, and a special good morning and welcome to Commissioners Ackerman and Commissioner Cross. We look forward to presenting to you all today and in the years to come. My name is Jill Fulcher, and I am an attorney at Beatty & Wozniak, representing the applicant today. With me today is my colleague, Teresa Sauer. I'm going to begin by walking us through an overview of the application before you, and then you're going to hear from Amanda Blanchard and Kyle Kerr, and they're going to walk you through the substance of the presentation. Docket 2203-0043 is an application for approval of the Tiffany 5 Oil and Gas Development Plan. The Tiffany 5 OGDP lies within a rural part of La Plata County, Colorado, and is approximately 1,320 acres. The Tiffany 5 OGDP requests approval to drill or to locate one multi-well pad within La Plata County, Colorado for development of two multi-well, two multilateral horizontal wells to the Fruitland Coal Formation. So the Tiffany 5 location is actually an active constructed location. So rather than disturb new surface, Simcoe is requesting approval to expand the Tiffany 5 location to drill those two multilateral wells. So not only does this minimize additional surface disturbance, but this will allow Simcoe to utilize existing roads and infrastructure that's already in place rather than disturb new ground. Simcoe has consulted with La Plata County, Colorado, which is the relevant local government regarding this OGDP, and La Plata County has issued a land use permit authorizing this expanded location. So development of the Fruitland Coal Formation is just a little bit different than development of the resources you're typically used to seeing in Colorado. Notably, development of coal bed methane wells does not involve hydraulic fracturing operations. So all of the attendant equipment and operations that are associated with those types of completions will not be present here. That means no frac fleets, no perforation operations, no flowback. So that will also decrease time on site and will decrease equipment on site and also decrease impacts from noise, odor, dust, and light. This pad is located within high priority habitat for elk and mule deer, and is also located within 1,454 feet of one residential building unit that is within a disproportionately impacted community. And so SIMCO did perform an alternative location analysis, evaluating all potential alternate locations that would be technically feasible to access the target minerals. And as part of that ALA, and as you're going to hear from Ms. Blanchard, there are, within that ALA, we determined there were no technically feasible alternatives that presented fewer impacts than the proposed location. Every other available alternate location was also within the same disproportionately impacted community and within the same high priority habitat, but also came within more receptors, either waters of the state, and all potential alternates came within more residential building units, closer proximity and greater number. SIMCO has secured a waiver and informed consent from the residential building unit owner within 2,000 feet for this pad, and that's part of your record in the packet before you. And SIMCO has also worked closely with Colorado Parks and Wildlife regarding a wildlife mitigation plan and BMPs associated to avoid direct and indirect impacts to wildlife. You're going to hear testimony that SIMCO is proposing to drill a few weeks into the winter months past December 1st to drill this pad. Right now, SIMCO is operating a rig just moved next door to this pad on an adjacent pad. So rather than demobilizing that rig and moving it off-site and to Aztec, New Mexico, you're going to hear some testimony to this effect. Rather than demobilizing the rig and those impacts that would be attendant to demobilizing the rig, SIMCO is proposing to drill the Tiffany 5 pad as soon as possible in the fall. But we recognize that drilling takes about 60 days total and might spill into those winter months. So SIMCO has worked with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to pay some additional compensatory mitigation for indirect impacts to wildlife in order to drill briefly into those winter months. So you're going to hear testimony to that effect as well. This oil and gas development plan does not include an application for spacing because these lands are part of an approved state unit, and that is the Tiffany unit approved by COGCC in 1996. These operations are consistent with that unit agreement and unit operating agreement, and all owners within the unit area have been notified of this application. This application has been provided to all interested parties under Rule 303E and has also been provided, as I said, to all unit owners within the entirety of the Tiffany unit, and no petitions have been received objecting to approval. SIMCO has also reached out directly to lots of stakeholders, including CPW, BLM, La Plata County, the surface owner, the residential building unit owner, and the Southern Ute Indian tribe. And the tribe has actually submitted a statement and letter in support of approval of this OGDP, and no other individual, government, or agency objects to approval of this application today. SIMCO has also worked closely with the staff and the director regarding this application. Staff and the director have reviewed these materials, and the director has issued a recommendation for approval of this application. So we would ask at the conclusion of the presentation today that you accept that recommendation and approve the Tiffany 5 OGDP. That concludes my overview of the application. I'm going to hand it over now to Amanda Blanchard. She is the environmental coordinator for SIMCO, and Kyle Kerr, who is the area manager for SIMCO, and they're going to walk you through the slide deck this morning.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Amanda Blanchard, and I am an environmental coordinator at ICAV Energy. I will walk us through the Tiffany 5 OGDP presentation today. But first, Kyle Kerr will give you a brief introduction of ICAV, and then I will discuss the proposed Tiffany 5 OGDP timeline, the location, high priority habitat, disproportionately impacted community, the alternative location analysis, summary of operations, and cumulative and beneficial impacts if the Tiffany 5 OGDP is approved.
Good morning. My name's Kyle Kerr. I'm the operations manager for the Colorado portion of ICAV, and I'm going to introduce ICAV to you a little bit this morning. ICAV is a private company that purchased the BP assets in 2019, and Simcoe LLC is the operating asset for ICAV in Southwest Colorado and Northern New Mexico. Simcoe LLC is the first U.S. energy asset that ICAV has had. However, ICAV is a 15-year established European energy company which specializes in integrated power generation of all types. Simcoe is a 215-person company based in Durango, Colorado. ICAV has worked very closely since entering this asset with all regulatory agencies and stakeholders to continue to drive our energy development. Next slide, Amanda, please. Simcoe operates approximately 1,315 wells in Colorado and approximately 2,361 wells in northern New Mexico. These wells are a mix of horizontal and vertical wells through formations such as the Mesa Verde, Dakota, Picture Cliffs, Mancos Shale, and Fruitland Coal Formation. This slide illustrates the approximate area of the Colorado operations, which occur mostly in La Plata County and within the exterior boundary of the Southern Ute Indian tribe. The Tiffany unit is outlined here in blue, and if you look close, the green star is the location of the Tiffany 5 OGDP, which Amanda will discuss further.
The Tiffany 5 OGDP timeline started with BP's planning efforts roughly in 2016 through 2018 with the COGCC, BLM, La Plata County, and the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. After a public hearing, Simcoe received an approved La Plata County permit in 2018 with a granted extension valid until August 9th, 2022. The OGDP, can you guys hear me okay, by the way? Okay,
Yes.
Great. The OGDP hearing application was filed with COGCC on March 1st, 2022, and was deemed complete on April 26th, 2022. The BLM APDs were refiled in February, with NEPA submitted in April, and the APD is complete. However, BLM is awaiting NEPA concurrence from the BIA, which I confirmed again yesterday. The BLM is supportive of the location, and the tribe supports the location and the application. The 30-day public comment period ended June 10th with 4 comments received. The petition deadline ended June 10th with no petitions filed, and the director's recommendation was received June 30th, which brings us to our hearing date today. This map is the overview of the OGDP. It asks to drill the 2 coal bed methane wells on an existing well pad in the already established Tiffany unit located in Township 33 North, Range 6 West, in Section 20 in La Plata County, which is approximately 7 miles southeast of Ignacio, Colorado, and 1 mile east of Highway 151. The existing location was selected to avoid building a new well pad, access road, and right-of-way. It will be temporarily expanded by approximately 3.5 acres to accommodate a rig to drill 2 multilateral fee and tribal coal bed methane wells. Upon interim reclamation, the final working pad surface will be approximately 2.8 acres. This map also displays the location of the reclamation where Simcoe plans to implement stormwater BMPs. The proposed Tiffany 5 location is shown here with the working pad surface as a solid black line, with the red line encompassing the existing well pad, the existing pipeline right-of-way, and the area of disturbance necessary to expand the location. The light pink area to the east is the Southern Ute Indian Tribe surface. This map also displays existing roads, infrastructure as the dotted red lines that Simcoe will utilize to prevent creation of additional linear feature impacts. So per Rule 304B2B, Simcoe completed an in-depth alternative location analysis due to the proposed location within a disproportionately impacted community, Block Group B, high priority habitat 1202D, mule deer and elk severe winter range, and located within 2,000 feet of a residential building unit. All locations from which targeted minerals can be accessed were analyzed. SIMCO did not evaluate any locations on suit surface because they support the proposed location. We also did not evaluate steep topography to the north and south. Therefore, a total of 6 other locations were analyzed. However, no other location was identified that would result in less impacts. All the locations analyzed resulted in larger construction footprint requirements and additional impacts to more types of high priority habitats, residential building units, and impacts to the waters of the US and or state. Please note all the alternative location analysis done also fall within a disproportionately impacted community and high priority habitat 1202D, as these layers are hundreds of acres large. While severe winter range for mule deer and elk cannot be avoided, nearby winter concentration areas and migratory corridors were avoided. The proposed location avoids linear habitat fragmentation and avoids impacts to wetlands and waters of the US or state. Due to the existing infrastructure, vehicular traffic is also a significant impact reduction, which reduces particulate matter, carbon monoxide, oxides of nitrogen, and benzene, as well as wildlife disturbance. As Jill mentioned, the coal bed methane wells are drilled and produced a little bit differently from other wells in Colorado. A few reasons how alternative locations are considered from a subsurface perspective include up-dip drilling, which is necessary to handle the water production, which is a byproduct of coal bed methane gas production. Surface and mineral access between the existing locations, and the location provides mineral access without extending the technical limits of drilling extended reach laterals. So based on pad siting and the alternative location analysis review, the following, but not including, but not limited to, avoidance, minimization, and siting advantages were identified. Expanding the existing location by approximately 3.5 acres with interim reclamation to be 2.83 acres is the least amount of new disturbance identified. Avoidance of irrigated agriculture lands, which is a priority of many surface owners in the Tiffany area. Avoidance of topographical features, which would create excess cut and fill. Avoidance of direct and indirect impacts of waters of the state and wetlands of the US. Least amount of residences within 2,000 feet within the disproportionately impacted community. Avoids habitat fragmentation within high priority habitat for big game due to the use of existing well pad location, the existing right of way and access. It has the least amount of traffic impacts. It has the least amount of odor, sound, dust, and lighting impacts to potential receptors. It avoids the overlapping wellbore laterals. It avoids down dip drilling versus the preferred direction of drilling in the formation. While the proposed location expansion triggers 304B criteria, it is still over 1 mile from a municipal boundary, high occupancy unit, designated outside activity area, school, childcare center, water supply area, and the furthest away from downgradient wetlands as compared to any other alternative location. Additionally, the wells will not be hydraulically fractured and will not produce oil, which results in an reduced overall drilling and production impacts. This figure displays the location of the disproportionately impacted community, which is block group B, that encompasses much of the eastern half of SIMCO's operations. You can see that outlined in blue, the entire state Tiffany unit is encompassed in a disproportionately impacted community and cannot be avoided. As I mentioned, the Tiffany 5 falls within 1202D high priority habitat for severe winter range for elk and mule deer, as shown here in the red dot. SIMCO and CPW engaged in pre-application consultation beginning in December 2021 to discuss alternative locations for avoidance, then minimization BMPs, and mitigation options. The proposed location maximizes the distance from the fewest RBUs closest to the edge of high priority habitat as possible, maximizes the distance from the fewest wetlands and waters of the US, and the surface owner is in favor of the project, siting of the location, and has completed a surface use agreement. This map also displays the additional complexities siting with high priority habitat in mind. You can see the avoided suit surface lands in turquoise the eastern high priority habitat boundary. You can see the elk winter concentration area in the north, and the western portion is encompassed in elk and mule deer winter range. This slide displays a larger scale of the high priority habitat layers within Simcoe's area of operations. The Tiffany unit is located in the southeastern area here of operations and the edge of all high priority habitat layers, and as close to the southern Indian reservation boundary as possible. As you can see, the majority of Simcoe's area of operations is encompassed in high priority habitat. In choosing the preferred existing location, we immediately decrease areas of impact. Additionally, literature reviews cited in the statement of basis and purpose for the mission change rulemaking reviewed density impacts on ungulates and found increased road density as having significant impacts on them. According to this literature cited in the statement of basis and purpose, the most important minimization tool to offset functional habitat loss is reduction of linear features due to habitat fragmentation and increased human presence on roads. While the 1200 rules don't, or CPDW do not consider linear impacts as a density trigger, Simcoe is avoiding construction of additional linear features, which will keep the road density as it currently is. In 2011, BP developed a wildlife mitigation plan in collaboration with CPW and the Nature Conservancy to mitigate anticipated wildlife impacts in the entire San Juan Basin. As part of that wildlife mitigation plan, a habitat prioritization model was enacted to identify and prioritize avoidance and mitigation of the largest remaining blocks of connected wildlife habitats and corridors in the San Juan Basin. While the wildlife mitigation plan is now expired, the habitat prioritization model was used in 2016 in citing this location, which identified key areas for avoidance. Additionally, the high quality habitats identified to minimize disturbance or avoid future development continue to be avoided by Simcoe. The 189 acre conservation easement purchased by BP was acquired by Simcoe to continue to offset impacts to wildlife and wildlife resources from all operators' energy development activities in the San Juan Basin. Credit for the conservation easement has already been given to BP and cannot be given again. The conservation easement remains on the property in perpetuity and cannot be severed. However, Simcoe can conduct wildlife improvements in cooperation with CPW and hopes to do so in the future. Simcoe and CPW discussed the different mitigation options. While Simcoe is interested in completing a compensatory mitigation projects, there are a few factors preventing completion of a project, which are most notably timeline to complete a plan and lack of shovel-ready CPW projects and staff. Consistent with the commission rules, CPW has chosen to pay the fees. However, Simcoe is still collaborating with CPW to see if the funds can go directly to a La Plata County group that is working towards a goal to increase the carrying capacity of elk, such as the Wild Turkey Federation and Natural Elk Federation. These groups would offset the indirect impacts directly related to impacts from developing less than 3 acres. Our collaboration conversations with CPW will continue and hopes a project will be available in the future. However, Simcoe is hopeful the fees will go directly to a project to help offset the functional habitat loss for wintering elk. Simcoe will pay $13,750 for direct impact fees. CPW added a 75% multiplier for indirect impact fees associated with our proposal for development after December 1st. Bringing the indirect impact fee to $243,285. Simcoe does propose to conduct construction and potentially rig move operations before December 1st, which is outside of the CPW recommended avoidance timeframe. Simcoe anticipates drilling to begin before or on December 1st and conclude in January, prior to the harshest winter months, with wells being put to production in February. The CPW recommended avoidance winter timeframe is December 1st to April 30th. Simcoe was able to secure 1 rig. Therefore, Simcoe proposes to move the rig approximately 3,500 feet west after drilling the Tiffany 3 wells in late fall. Commencement of the drilling for the 2 wells is anticipated to take place in early winter and take approximately 60 days total to be out before the peak wintering timeframe. We would conduct SIMOPS operations, which creates a shorter spud to first production timeframe, yields maintenance efficiencies, and results in a shorter human presence timeframe. And we are not requesting year-round drilling, but rather a short window of the early wintering timeframe. There are benefits to drilling into the recommended avoidance timeframe, which include avoiding multiple move-in rig ups, prevents moving to and from Aztec, New Mexico, which includes approximately 64 round-trip heavy truck trips per move and 120 round-trip of light truck moves per move. Reduction in rig moves also avoids additional air quality impacts, as I previously stated, reduces potential collisions with ungulates, and minimizes increased potential for invasive species transport into elk wintering forage areas. The proposal reduces truck traffic for surface owners, nearby residents, other wildlife, and traffic on US and county highways. As I mentioned, Simcoe anticipates bringing the wells to production in February, which avoids the late winter, early spring, and the harshest time of year for elk and mule deer. Again, no oil would be produced and no fracking is proposed. Simcoe would not mobilize and demobilize sand trucks, pipe trucks, fluid trucks, conduct loud perforation operations, flowback, or equipment staging, or other operations related to fracking. This not only reduces the human presence, but also substantially shortens the time frame to put the well to production, as well as substantially reduces light and noise levels. CPW and Simcoe analyze ways to avoid and minimize impacts from drilling during the recommended avoidance timeframe. CPW concurs with Simcoe's proposed best management practices outlined in the Wildlife Mitigation Plan as ways to avoid and minimize and mitigate adverse impacts to wildlife resources. So as I mentioned, the anticipated development schedule is to conduct the existing well pad extension later this month or in August and begin drilling as soon as the rig is available in late fall or early winter, with production in February 2023. Simcoe's goal is to move the rig and begin drilling as soon as possible to limit drilling beyond December 1st. And currently we are ahead of schedule and moving to the Tiffany 3 today. CPW utilized their expertise and rigorous evaluation protocols to determine habitat quality and quantity, and to determine how Simcoe's proposed BMPs aid in offsetting potential indirect impacts. Many of Simcoe's committed BMPs to reduce impacts to other receptors such as noise, light, and surface water also aid in reducing impacts to elk and mule deer. Simcoe is committed to implementing over 100 BMPs to minimize impacts. I've mentioned several, but a few more listed here, such as low bleed pneumatics, AVO and leak inspections, remote monitoring, no flaring or fracking, reduced emissions due to one proposed rig move, and existing infrastructure for air quality. A few notable BMPs for surface water protection include avoidance of the nearest downgradient wetland by over 3,000 feet, and the nearby wash is protected by no hydrocarbon or crude oil production, so no storage or transport of oils, the use of no pits, no oil-based muds, and the cuttings will be on location for the least amount of time as practicable. Secondary containment will be under fluids during drilling, and reduction of spill potential due to no proposed fracking. To further reduce spill potential, Simcoe will implement a stormwater management plan, use the existing gas and water infrastructure, and require annual SPCC training to employees. Simcoe is committed to continuous sound monitoring during pre-production activities and installation of sound walls. Lights will be pointed downward and concentrated toward the rig floor, and we will enforce speed limits and apply fugitive dust control such as mag chloride. Simcoe is committed to BMPs to protect public health and safety, including maintaining a 24-hour dispatch center. As represented in the OGDP application, there are many more BMPs Simcoe will implement to reduce impacts to nearby receptors. COGCC staff have reviewed and do not have any additional BMPs to add. The cumulative impacts of the Tiffany 5 project are reduced by lessening the potential impacts to the fewest receptors as possible. Cumulative impacts to public health, safety, and the environment are reduced with regular trainings to reduce emergencies and enhance capabilities and watchfulness of emergency responders. Reduction of truck traffic and vehicle emissions also lessens cumulative impacts. Construction, drilling, and production from the 2 wells to be located on the Tiffany 5 well pad will result in many beneficial impacts as well, such as creation of jobs for minority and non-minority population, federal and state tax revenue to support the maintenance of La Plata County schools, hospitals, emergency departments, and public infrastructure, aid in lowering energy costs, aid in ensuring U.S. energy security. In addition, revenue production would go to the Southern Ute Indian Tribe, the federal government, and individuals owning mineral rights within a disproportionately impacted community. SIMCO has already plugged 16 wells associated with the unit development program, which is a 26% plugging rate. The remaining wells are all economic producers with the exception of 3 shut-in wells, which will comply with the financial assurance rules. There are no legacy wells that predate the unit, and there are no older orphan well types. The 2 wells that I mentioned earlier on this existing location are good examples of wells being plugged in association with this development. The Tiffany 5 is recommended for approval by the director. It is protective of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. We conducted significant consultation with CPW and provided notice and outreach to all stakeholders. It is supported by La Plata County and the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. And SIMCO received 3 supportive comments from the public. Finally, SIMCO is committed to BMPs to avoid, minimize, and mitigate potential impacts from public health, safety, welfare, and the environment and wildlife resources. Thank you for your time, and we have a panelist ready for your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Blanchard, for the presentation. Very thorough. Appreciate all the information that went into that. Commissioners, we now have an opportunity for questions to the panel. Commissioner McGowan, then Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the presentation and answering some questions that I had. I was very interested in the expired habitat plan and the conservation easement and how this kind of played into your development plans and attempts to continue to protect these corridors. And Commissioner Ackerman probably is going to maybe hone in on some of this stuff better than I. I'm wondering if you could go back to that map and just explain how this proposed site continues that protective strategy for these habitat corridors instead of continuing to fragment them. I couldn't quite tell what the red and the black and the orange were in your map because it was kind of small, and I was wondering if you could just explain that a little bit.
Absolutely. Do you see, thank you for the question, Commissioner McGowan. Do you see my screen?
I do not.
I had hit screen share, but I closed it out.
I think you need to screen share again. There we go.
You see it?
Yep.
Okay, so yes, I agree, this map was small. And this was the map that came in the original 2011 BP Wildlife Mitigation Plan. So this predates my time. I don't know that I will be able to thoroughly answer your question, but I will do my best. So these red areas here were the areas determined as the highest priorities as avoidance. So they're areas not only for elk and mule deer with their migration corridors, but there are also other sensitive species such as species in the Colorado swamp. And then our location is right, do you see my cursor by chance? So, yes. Okay. So our location is proposed to be right here, and it avoids these, all these sensitive areas. Does that answer your question? Can I provide anything more?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing continued adherence to the plan, even though it has expired, because I think it's a well thought out plan. It's a good idea. My second question, I'm just wondering, the 3 shut-in wells that you have, I'm the one who asked whether or not there was a possibility to plug any wells that were at the end of their life as part of a beneficial offset. The shut-in wells, are those going to go back into production, and are they owned by SIMCO? And just curious what the plans are for those.
So which 3 shut-in wells are you specifically talking about? The
I think the ones that you,
on
that
the-
Ms. Blanchard just mentioned in her presentation.
Okay. There are 2 plugged and abandoned wells on the expansion. Excuse me, point. One was plugged under Southern Ute BLM Authority several years ago. And one is in the process, working through the process of being plugged. We've already done the downhole activities, re-entered the well in March, and are currently in compliance and working with staff to get approved subsequent Form 6. At that point, we'll remove all the facilities and reclaim the surface. I would like to point out that we have very minimal shut-in wells in our asset at all. And also over the last 3 to 4 years, I believe we put in the paperwork. We have a 26% well plug-in rate in Tiffany. So we do try to operate very efficiently with our production, and we review all wells in our asset monthly in Colorado for whether they are producing appropriately or being plugged, and we have an active program of managing those.
Okay, thank you. And not a question, but a comment. I appreciated you explaining why you can't move the refueling and storage equipment further away from the high water mark, because that's usually what I ask when I'm like, can't you move it to the other side of the pad or further away? So I appreciated you including that upfront in the application. Thanks for your information today.
Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree. I really appreciate the thorough presentation. I wanted to start with a question, then I have a few comments as well. I thought I saw, and maybe I missed in your presentation, a variance associated with this as well. I believe you're with, is that not the case? Okay, I may be thinking of the other one then. Thank you. I appreciate that. This is a good example, I think, of the new revised regulations being effective. This is a project that is definitely impactful on wildlife and wildlife habitat. I think BP has responsibly, prior to those regulations, talked about potential impacts to wildlife and how they intended to mitigate them, and appreciate ICAF continuing on with that same mindset. I do believe mitigation is appropriate given the severe winter range component, both of elk and mule deer. I appreciated the thorough ALA and agree with the findings of the ALA that the pad that was selected as the most appropriate place from a wildlife disturbance perspective. The main crux of my comments focuses around, as you might imagine, the potential for drilling within the general proposed winter timing stipulations. And it sounds like you've had some thorough discussions with CPW about that. I appreciate, generally, as Ms. Blanchard stated, the intent is to not drill between December 1st and the end of April. And her assessment was correct in that as that timing goes further, it generally becomes more sensitive. Of course, that's weather dependent and dependent on some other factors. Can you talk a little bit more about the potential for timing of drilling after December 1? You mentioned that you would intend to move the rig prior to December 1. But what are your likely timeframes? I think you mentioned moving into January as well. Can you clarify that for me?
So as you know, drilling operations are pretty fluid, particularly with horizontal wells. Our current plan is to move directly to this pad as soon as our previous wells at our pad on the southern property that was shown in the map are complete. We're moving to those next week. The possibility of extending beyond December 1st exists, but we have no intention of having a longer drilling period into the closure timeframe than we need to. The challenge that we're going to be dealing with is, being that they are multilaterals in a coal bed methane facility, I'm going to go on mute for just a second. That's the Durango train. I recommend if you haven't ridden it, ride it. Our intent is to get these wells drilled as quickly and efficiently as possible. The only challenges that would prevent us from doing that would be downhole issues, technical issues related to the coal, those types of things. We are doing, as Amanda said, SIMOPs for construction of activities at the same time. So we'll limit our impact to first delivery as well. There is a potential that we have very limited impact during the closure period, and that is our intent. We do not expect that it would go all the way through April.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. I appreciate that, and would, of course, encourage the operations to go forth, as Mr. Kerr has stated, that make every effort to complete that drilling process prior to December 1. And if it does need to go forward, try to limit the time after December 1. I think that's an appropriate mitigative strategy. Thank you, Mr.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman and Commissioner McGowan, for bringing up some of these points. There are also questions that I had. I do think that in this particular application, one of the and I do really appreciate the thoroughness of the explanation, the detail in the application. It was easy to read and understand. And so I think that's good. It was clear that there was significant consultation with CPW on this particular application. However, I still have heartburn with the avoidance piece bar being met around the timing stipulations on the severe winter habitat. And I had heartburn when we did the mission change rulemaking about this increased payment in lieu or mitigation fees associated with avoidance of wildlife impacts. And so understanding that it's possible that you're going to go into this timing stipulation, this timing stipulation time period, and that there is real possibilities for significant, wildlife impacts, depending on the kind of winter we have. Right now, what you're asking for is the ability to drill and operate throughout the entire severe winter timing stipulation time period, because there's no date specific in the application as to when you're going to end. And so I'm wondering if you would be willing to put a date specific, January 1, for example, is what I'm hearing that you would be comfortable with as far as your expectation to be operating, rather than just having it as a little more open-ended as I read it.
So thank you for the question, Commissioner Messner. I'll let Kyle add more to a little bit more of the specifics on if we're willing to take a specific date. I was very careful in our consultation with CPW. We did discuss that we are not asking for the entire winter timeframe. I did mention several times we are anticipating to put the wells to production in February and to conclude drilling in January. Right now we're ahead of schedule, so there's potential. But again, I'll let Kyle speak a little bit more to that. There are other impacts to moving in later in the spring. So I did not touch on those, but we are reducing impacts to other species and including elk or elk young. So I think that by reducing and just going in the early winter, in having those consultations with CPW and conversations, we are working as hard as we can to reduce impacts during the winter drilling timeframe.
Mr. Kerr?
Yes, so we did have some internal discussions on the potential for limiting the time frame. We probably should have some additional discussions on that. It is our intent to have it done and first delivered by February 1st. Really, to be honest, what we we would really like to have it done before December 1st. The reason we want to be as clear as possible with this application and request that time is if we did have a challenge, we had a stranded rig, it's much harder to deal with that situation on the back end than it is on the front end. I do think it's, and Teresa, feel free to speak here. Like I said, we did have internal discussions on that, and I think Teresa can cover that.
I mean, Commissioner Messner, you bring up a great point, and I think that it's important to remember that ICAV is doing the avoidance, the minimization, and the mitigation piece. They're doing the avoidance by going out and choosing a site that is already an oil and gas location. They are using existing surface, they're using existing right-of-ways, they're using all of the existing corridors that they can so that they have the minimum impact possible. Plus, they're going back to that 2011 plan that BP worked so hard on with the Nature Conservancy, with La Plata County, with CPW, with others, to make sure that they're avoiding impacts to the big game throughout the area so that they are in a corridor that avoids as much as possible. The minimization with all of the BMPs, Amanda has done a great job working with Brian over at CPW, having multiple conversations, talking through BMPs, all of the things that ICAV can do to be avoiding and minimizing, they're doing. And additionally, we talked about that mitigation. ICAV has to pay the fee, but really working hard with CPW, what projects can we be doing? What projects can we be looking at in the future? Unfortunately, there wasn't something shovel ready right now, but what can we be doing in the future so that we have a shovel ready project that we can put something into the ground for the community, for the species. I think going in and getting the drill rig in prior to that December 1 day, getting as much done as possible and still having some overlap is a less impact than being in the spring when you have, as Amanda said, you have those new calves out in the field, you have the new animals out there. You've got a lot more risk of wildlife being hit. You have a lot more risk there. I think being in at the time that they're proposing, they'll get in, they'll get out, hopefully before severe winter comes in. And you have the reduced impacts of the truck traffic and all the other human impacts as well.
Thank you for your answers. I mean, I think I hear what you're saying, but I think I'm hearing you say that you're not interested in having a time certain associated with your incursion into the timing stipulations.
I think, and I'll let Kyle and the others speak to this, but I think that a time certain gets a little bit complicated when you're talking about geology and such, that you could do a time certain, but you also have to have that opportunity to deal with the fact that there may be a delay in drilling. And if that comes up, how is that addressed?
Really, that is my hesitation, Commissioner, is that from a technical standpoint, we could get into a situation where you can't move forward, you can't go backwards, and you have a stranded rig. Because drilling in the coal, it's very tight seams, and particularly in this area, you have varying pressures. There is the potential to get stuck. And if you get stuck, you could lose the well entirely, which would cause greater impact in the long run, coming back in the spring, having to potentially respud, do other things. So the challenge, my only hesitation to that is that I think that we are confident that we won't extend heavily into that period, but you don't know what challenges you're going to find until you're actually in there drilling.
And just so I understand, because I mean, it sounds like if you wanted certainty, you would just avoid the timing stipulation totally and start in April, right? However,
we would.
my understanding is that the reason to not do that is that you would have to break down the rig, send it to New Mexico, and then bring it back up, which would be an additional expense to the operation. Is that what my understanding is?
It's not even about the expense, to be honest with you. There's really two drivers for us wanting to get it done. And it is very much about having to pull those rigs in and out. As you know, in this part of the world, the spring can be worse from a road standpoint and impact to the community, pulling heavy equipment in. But also, it's that rigs in this market today, with where gas prices are, we have no guarantee of a rig in spring. We have a rig that we have currently that is doing an excellent job on our current wells, and that we can carry into that. If we release that rig, there is no guarantee that we will have a rig to come back in the spring anyway. So our impacts would be greater, in my opinion, to be honest, to the community bringing in all that heavy equipment a second time. That's if we can even accomplish the goal of drilling, because they're just, once we release a rig, there's no guarantee it comes back.
How can you add just a little bit about the safety of the rig crew right now versus a rig crew that you might get in the spring?
Yes, and this is important to me personally, and we have, when you stand up a rig crew in operation like this, with all the moving parts that you have, the more experience that crew gets working together, the better they operate from a safety standpoint. And starting fresh with a new crew, and these are folks that can't afford to be laid down for several months and then come back to the same job. They'll go to another crew. And so bringing that rig back in the spring, you'll have a fresh crew, you'll have the additional impacts of transporting in there if I can get the crew and the rig. But most importantly, you have a greater risk of somebody potentially getting injured from inexperience working together on those what we would consider challenging working conditions.
Thank you for your responses.
Commissioner Cross?
I'd first off just like to reiterate the appreciation for the detailed presentation. Similar to some of the other commissioners, I think many of my initial questions were answered, including how some of the compensatory mitigation would be spent and ideas on how it would be spent. I just wanted to follow up on a couple questions that have come up during comments here. You've mentioned a couple different times that the Tiffany 3 is ahead of schedule. It's currently being drilled now on the Tiffany 3?
The Tiffany 2, remaining wells in the Tiffany 2 are ahead of schedule. We're actually running production tubing today. And then we're moving to Tiffany 3, which puts us ahead of schedule on 3, because we're moving this weekend actually to Tiffany 3.
And where's the Tiffany 2 compared to the Tiffany 3?
They are all within a 2-mile radius of each other.
And that's also outside the avoidance area within the wildlife plan?
It's under Southern Ute jurisdiction, BLM and Southern Ute jurisdiction. And it's within those same areas, but it had a totally different set of stipulations and approvals associated with it.
And with respect to the Tiffany 3, does it have similar mitigation and best management practices with respect to the wildlife?
It does. It does. The purpose, we couldn't start on Tiffany 2, which is under Southern Ute as well, until June 1st, because it has a similar closure on it. So 3 is permitted, ready to go. The pad's already built. That's the next one we move to. But we would have the same, very, very similar closure requirements for 3, all 2, 3, and 5, because they all fall within that area. It's just under a different jurisdiction.
Thank you. And then it also noted that BLM generally approves of the Tiffany 5, and it will be facing suit approval after this. Have you received any kind of indication of suit concerns or suit additional restrictions that they want to put on the project?
Thanks for the question, Commissioner Cross. I did talk to BLM yesterday, and they are actively in touch with the BIA. BIA is extremely understaffed, so they have asked for our patience However, the BLM is extremely happy with this location. Their priorities are that it is co-located and that there's existing use of infrastructure. They will not add any additional surface COAs to it. They could potentially add subsurface as their jurisdiction allows, but other than that, they have no other concerns.
Thank you. And then last, I think I just more of a comment than a question. In Ms. Sauer, I know that you talked about the avoidance, the minimization, and the mitigation, and I think that it is important, especially in a high priority habitat area like this. And I think the different BMPs that you're putting into place, as well as trying to make sure that everything is done continuously, is a good way to avoid, minimize, and mitigate. Obviously, it's impossible to sort of eliminate any kind of concerns absent no drilling whatsoever, but trying to use the same pad I think is important. Trying to make sure that you're avoiding numerous rig ups is important, and sticking within those wildlife plans as brought up by Commissioner McGowan as well is I think important. So again, I appreciate the thorough presentation and the steps to try and make sure that we look at alternative locations and use the location that's going to have the least impact on what's clearly the biggest priority in this area, and that's the habitat.
Thank you, Commissioner Cross. Further questions for the panel? All right, thank you very much for the dialogue with the commissioners, with the good questions. At this time, we will move into commissioner deliberations. Does any commissioner desire to start with deliberations? Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think generally speaking, this is a well done application in an area that has had significant previous oil and gas activity. It's utilizing existing pad. The access areas are good. The BMPs are good. They've definitely done their homework as far as what needs to happen in order to meet the standards, both with the ALA, with gaining informed consent from the RBU that's within 2,000 feet, and other associated BMPs that they have. I still have heartburn with the kind of open-ended access to be able to operate throughout the entire severe winter range timing stipulation. I would be interested in looking at a BMP that would set a time certain and then include language in there that if there was some, underground geologic hiccup that required them to operate, further than whatever the timing stip was, that on a case specific basis, they could come back to staff and ask for the ability to extend that time frame. But I'm pretty uncomfortable with the open-ended opportunity to operate throughout the entire severe winter range. I don't know as that mitigation funding offsets the potential impacts. I still have questions about that. And because there's no projects that are shovel ready in the specific area for this particular habitat, it also gives me a little bit of pause there. So that's something that I'm kicking around in my head right now. But generally speaking, I appreciate that the local government has looked at this, that they've approved of it, that it's gone through the different levels, and so that's my one heartburn right now.
Chair, may I just add one brief clarification?
Go ahead.
So Commissioner Messner, in the wildlife mitigation plan that I worked with and wrote for CPW, I'm pretty sure that we have to adhere to this wildlife mitigation plan as it is a part of the OGDP. And within that wildlife mitigation plan, I do state that we plan to bring the wells to production in February and to be out of there. So I do not, in our conversations with CPW, have not been during the entire timeframe. So I just wanted to provide that clarification that we are committed, at least in our wildlife mitigation plan.
Thank you, Ms. Blanchard, for that clarification. I've got some thoughts about that, but Commissioner Messner, did you want to weigh back in now that you've heard that?
No, I mean, unless it's a BMP specific in the application or a condition of approval, I don't know as it's enforceable. And so I understand it's in the wildlife mitigation plans. Perhaps it is enforceable. But nonetheless, that's the piece that I'm hung up on. And so I appreciate the clarification there within your wildlife mitigation plan. These are my comments for the deliberation amongst the commissioners. I'd like to continue deliberating amongst the commissioners.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I appreciate that, Commissioner Messner. I'm pretty familiar with this area. I've lived down here for 25 years. The La Plata County boom that occurred in the 2000s and beyond with regard to oil and gas wells resulted in, you saw the maps. There's wells all over the place down here. And, frankly, I don't share the same concern as you, Commissioner Messner, on this point. I believe they've, for all the reasons as articulated by Ms. Sauer and others, I believe that this is as good of an avoidance as can be. I think they're genuine in their commitment to get in and get out. Again, knowing sort of the range down here, those elk and mule deer are doing pretty well. I've driven around those areas. And so I don't have that as big of a concern. I think they, meet the tenets of our rules and regulations. They're paying the fees. So I'm for deliberative purposes, I'm a commissioner that does not have a significant heartburn with regard to no sort of hard end date on that. I think they're going to try to do the right thing here. So that's a second, commissioners with deliberative thoughts. What are the other three thinking at this point? Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I struggled with the same thing that Commissioner Messner did as I reviewed this application. Generally, in the past, CPW has strongly encouraged drilling activities to take place outside of the winter stipulations in severe elk winter range, especially. Elk are significantly impacted by winter range drilling. And that said, this is in compliance with our regulations. And as Commissioner Messner pointed out, this issue of kind of pay to drill during the winter stipulations was pretty hotly debated and contested during the time frame. And the intent, I believe, during the time frame was to make for an allowance with appropriate mitigation in times when avoidance really was not possible. I too, just again for deliberative purposes with other commissioners, would have concern going forward if just kind of pay to play during the winter range timing stipulations became a standard practice as a matter of convenience rather than a matter of necessity. I think we should take all precautions to avoid those winter timing stipulations, period. And that said, like I mentioned, it is in compliance with our regulations. So this is something that I certainly will be keeping an eye on going forward, and would very much like an update from our staff on what the ultimate cease drilling date was on this particular well.
I'd like to just say I completely appreciate Commissioner Messner's concerns and the idea of the pay to play sort of aspect of this. As Commissioner Ackerman indicated, I don't really foresee this as a situation where it's a pay to play, especially given that they're working with the rig in that area already. They're trying to get it done in a plan that, as they mentioned, is moving ahead of schedule, hoping to keep it ahead of schedule, hoping to get in and get out of the area. And that's one of the big things that sticks out to me, is trying to make sure that we don't have the equipment that's already in the area, move it out of the area, move it back into the area next spring. I feel like those additional trips is counterintuitive to that avoidance, minimization, and mitigation aspect of what we're trying to do. And so I do not see this as a pay-to-play sort of aspect, as Commissioner Ackerman indicated. And I think one of the other things that sticks out to me while I appreciate the idea of kind of a drop dead deadline that we could put into a BMP, I'd be curious, Commissioner Messner, as to what kind of language we could potentially put in there to make it not only enforceable, but also efficient, and to try and say, you know, for purposes of if there's some kind of geological issue, what kind of limitations do we place on that? If there's some kind of accident out on the site, are we going to shut it down, bring it out, and then bring it back in the spring? I just have some concerns about trying to make some kind of BMP that would be too restrictive of some kind of exception to what it would be doing. And at the same time, trying to come back and say, all right, this has happened. Now we'd like to come back to the COGCC on kind of an expedited basis to try and get an additional week, an additional 2 weeks to get past, you know, a January 1st deadline because something like that came up. And so that's part of, I appreciate and I understand the desire to have that drop dead deadline, but just from an efficiency standpoint, I think the practicality of it could be difficult as well.
Mr. Chair, may I jump in for a moment?
Go ahead, AG Mercer.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify, going back to the discussion that Commissioner Messner and Ms. Blanchard had a couple minutes ago about there being a February 1 deadline in the wildlife mitigation plan. And I did want to clarify that all of the plans that are submitted as part of an OGDP are binding on the operator in the same way that a BMP or a COA would be. So I haven't had the chance on the fly to review that particular plan, but if it does include a commitment to be out of there essentially by February 1st, that is a binding commitment. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear for purposes of your deliberations.
Thank you, AG Mercer. Appreciate the weigh in. Commissioner Messner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Mercer. I mean, if that's the case, I mean, if all of that's binding without having it, pulling it out and putting it into a BMP, and I'm going to go back right now and confirm that there's a February 1st piece in that wildlife mitigation plan, then I don't see a need for an off ramp or anything. That's a requirement of the application, and so that gives me more comfort.
Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate all my fellow commissioner comments thus far, and I don't necessarily disagree with folks. I think that in this case, in reading the materials and based on the presentation today, I feel like there was pretty robust discussion with CPW and consultation. And so in this instance, I think I'm going to refer to their expertise and the discussions they've had with the operator about how to move forward and the timing to do so. I think the operator has heard loud and clear we would want them to get in and out and be as least disruptive as possible during this kind of key timing for winter and mule deer winter concentration timing. So hopefully they've heard and they're going to do what they can to do this on the early side rather than the late side. But I'm going to defer to CPW on this one. And I also was appreciative that they're picking an area that's already been disturbed, a pad that's already in existence, roads that already are in place, which I think will be less disruptive than if they were doing this in a brand new area during winter concentration. This perhaps is an area that those species aren't maybe visiting or around as much as if they were disturbing a brand new area or one of the corridors that they're trying to protect.
Further deliberation, Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if the applicant could point out where in that wildlife mitigation plan this date is. It's not jumping out at me.
You're right. I had mentioned that it says that we're going to put the wells to production in February. There is no February 1st date in the plan.
So All right, will you confirm on the record here that you will put the wells in production in February or February 1st? Or I mean, it seems to indicate to me that your intent was that you will be done with pre-production activities by the 1st of February, so that production would happen in February. And I need some clarification there if that's the case.
I'll let Kyle go ahead and clarify, but yes, that is the case.
It is absolutely our business goal. You know, the challenge that it creates to have a rig stranded or go extended into a drilling program can greatly affect our business as a whole. I can fully commit to you that our goal is to have these wells drilled in that time frame, barring some technical challenge, you know, or unforeseen challenge. That is absolutely our goal as an organization. It's tied to our development goal as a whole.
So, I mean, goal is different than I commit to, right? So
Fair enough.
And I'm not going to hang up here because I may be
Yeah.
in the minority here, but I'm just, you know, I have a hard time with the pay to play concept. I'm not saying that this is pay to play, but I also don't want to get us in a road that continues this idea that you can pay to play utilizing the mitigation fee to make things to create impacts that are potentially avoidable. I think that what you're saying very clearly is that you're needing to get in there. There's a technical reason that you need to get in there. That technical reason is to give yourself a couple of months to get pre-production activities complete, drilling and pre-production, and that you would be rolling with production by February. And I'm just trying to understand if that's like.
Yeah, I'll be honest, it's not our strategy to try to extend wildlife closures. We have quite a few in our operation as well. We have eagle impacts, and we have operations on the Forest Service, and only under in our performance over the last several years, we'll tell you that only under severe situations have we even asked for extensions on those types of things. This is a development that is extremely complicated, and the efficiency of moving from one to another reduces impacts as well as creates efficiencies, and that's specific to this development. You know, we generally, as a business, follow those rules and don't look for extensions beyond those. We've left plenty of production down over the last few years that CPW can attest to, that we don't make it a practice to try to challenge these rules.
And Kyle, I don't know if you're seeing, we are getting messages from leadership team that we are committing to February production.
Yes. Yeah. So my bosses are committed, and I when I say goals, what I really mean is a commitment as well.
Mr. Chair, if I may as well.
Go ahead, Ms. Wiltshire.
Thank you very much. There's been a lot of chatter, and to Maida's point, I'm not sure if Kyle's seen some of the messages from upper management, but I think just so that everyone's clear that, you know, Simcoe's goal is not pay to play here. It really is to avoid and minimize as much as possible, to get in and get out as quickly as possible. And because we are ahead of schedule on the adjacent pad, I think Simcoe would be comfortable for purposes of this discussion and to satisfy Commissioner Messner to put a timing stip on this OGDP at February 1st. I think January 1st was mentioned, but I think February 1st, to have all drilling wrapped by February 1st gives a little bit more of a window in case there's a safety issue or a drilling issue that does become present. And then maybe we also alleviate Commissioner Cross's concerns about how that would work in practice with reaching out to staff if there was a reason to extend drilling. So I think February 1st is a timing commitment we're comfortable with, and hopefully will help everyone, will satisfy concerns that we're not going to be drilling well into harsh winter season, and again would maybe account for a few additional weeks if there was a technical issue that was experienced downhole.
Thank you for that. With that commitment from the operator on this issue, do we have a motion? Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move approval of the Tiffany Pad 5 OGDP application as presented and with the timing stipulation indicated by Ms. Fulcher.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, panel, for the presentation. Your OGDP is approved with the motion as granted here. It is 10:26. We've got one other item on our agenda. Let's take a 10-minute break and return at 10:36.
Thank you very much, commissioners.
Welcome back, commissioners. It is 10:36. We'll get started again. With that, we will move to the last matter on our docket 2108-00130. This is a Crestone Peak Resource Operating LLC, the Sky Ranch Oil and Gas Development Plan. As I mentioned, we do not have public comment, and I believe we're first going to Ms. Jost for a presentation.
Hey, good morning. Thank you. Well, good morning, commissioners, commission staff, and council, along with members of the public. My name is Jamie Jost. I'm with Jost Energy Law, and I, along with my partner, Kelsey Wozelinski, represent Crestone Peak Resources Operating LLC on this Sky Ranch OGDP application. Kelsey and I would like to extend a very warm welcome to Commissioner Ackerman as well as Commissioner Cross. We look forward to presenting this OGDP in front of you today, as well as presenting to you in the future. This uncontested Sky Ranch OGDP application was submitted in August of 2021. It's been properly noticed and published and has been supported by the director's recommendation. So after the presentation this morning, Crestone respectfully requests that this commission approve this OGDP. Mr. Dan Harrington, the Civitas Asset Development Lead, is going to be giving the presentation today. We also have several Civitas subject matter experts available for questions from the commissioners when we conclude as well. With that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Jamie, and good morning, commissioners and staff. I'd like to run us through here our Crestone Peak Resources Operating Sky Ranch OGDP application. This is a 12-well development in Arapahoe County, and we'll get to the details on the subsequent slides. Jamie, if you could roll ahead, please. So online today, we have myself, Dan Harrington. I'm the asset development lead for this part of Civitas's asset base. We have Nathan Bennett, our manager of well and location permitting, Kathy Stearman, our manager of air compliance and engineering, and we have some additional technical staff on hand should questions arise, those being Kathy Denzer, regulatory, Lori Wiseman, mineral land, and Jeremy Saunier, surface land. Bob Resnahan is on holiday this week. This is an overview map of the location of the Sky Ranch oil and gas pad and associated development area. We're sitting here in section 10 of 4 South 65 West in unincorporated Arapahoe County. This pad is on Hayes Mountain Road, and the nearest cross street is what will be 6th Avenue when it's built. The relevant local government is Arapahoe County, with whom we have an approved permit. And there is approximate local government in the city of Aurora. Those are the yellow polygons on the map. This is a 2560 acre development area OGDP, including 2 1280 DSUs, one east, one west for mineral development. We're proposing 12 new wells from the Sky Ranch location, and that will join the 6 existing horizontal wells from other locations in the OGDP. We have no RBUs within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface. We do have one at 2,004 feet with whom we've We've obtained an informed consent letter. There's no high priority habitat and no ALA was required, and we have received no public comments to date. To be clear, the Sky Ranch OGDP is not included in the box elder cap in that the surface location is in unincorporated Arapahoe County and not Aurora. However, the Sky Ranch OGLA does sit within the 1 mile buffer of the box elder cap proper, and such its wells and traffic have been considered in the cumulative impacts analysis that was submitted with the box elder cap. Quick timeline on the history of this oil and gas location. This was the OGDP was initially filed August 2nd, 2021. We've worked with staff on some revisions in the meantime. We got to completeness March 18th, 2022. We got through our public comment and consultation period and petition deadline. We saw a director's recommendation July 1st, 2022, and we're here at the hearing date today on the 13th. As I said, the relevant local government is Arapahoe County, and we do have an approved permit from Arapahoe County, which was issued August 16th, 2021. I won't read the details here, but we did receive a positive director's recommendation on 7/1/22, and I'm sure you've seen the text of it, but it's replicated here. As I said earlier, the nearest RBU surface is 2,004 feet from the Sky Ranch working pad surface. 604B1 does not apply here, but Crestone did go ahead and obtain informed consent from those land RBU owners. Our anticipated timing development is chiefly in 2023. We'll look to construct the pad first quarter to second quarter. We'll drill May to September, complete by the end of the year, and bring the pad online in early 2024. Here's a sampling of some of the best management practices we are planning for the site. We will use an electric drilling rig connected to utility power to reduce both emissions and noise. We will install temporary sound walls, specifically a 32-foot high wall on the south edge of the pad, which is the edge of the pad facing the RBU, to reduce noise. We'll utilize a closed loop drilling system with type 3 odorless BTEX-free drilling mud. We'll control dust through regular application of freshwater and mag chloride to dirt and gravel pad surfaces and associated roads. We've designed location lighting to minimize visibility off the pad site while maintaining sufficient illumination for worker safety. And we'll use a quiet fleet hydraulic fracturing technology during the completion phase. As to our air monitoring, we do have plans for continuous air monitoring through drilling completions in the first 6 months of production. We'll have baseline monitoring in place 10 days prior to drilling. We will report out the results of this monitoring to CDPHE during pre and early production, and we will maintain our ongoing cooperation with independent monitoring programs overseen by the CDPHE and COGCC. So in summary, we believe the Sky Ranch oil and gas location is protective of the public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. We have achieved a local government disposition from Arapahoe County, as well as positive feedback in the affirmative director's recommendation. We've implemented numerous best management practices to avoid, minimize, and mitigate temporary impacts to the community and the environment. And we respectfully request approval from the commission on this 2560 acre Sky Ranch OGDP. I'd like to run through some questions that we received earlier this week. Kind of read the question, then I'll kind of read our drafted response, and we can open it up to further discussion after it need be. The question is, why hasn't Crestone yet developed a gas capture plan for production? Per Rule 903E, gas capture plans are only required where an operator cannot commit to connecting to a gas gathering system at the commencement of production operations. We have committed to that and have noted such in our Form 2A. The director's recommendation does include a COA that a gas capture plan be developed prior to completions and submitted via Form 4. However, considering Crestone's commitment to a gas gathering connection in compliance with Rule 903C, Crestone does not anticipate that a gas capture plan is required. Second question, if I'm understanding correctly, there is takeaway for a pipeline for gas, but Crestone is not committing to pipeline, but rather storage and trucking away for oil. Can the operator please explain why pipeline is not available or chosen? It seems cumulative impacts could be reduced with pipeline committed to both gas and oil. Crestone is in the process of permitting and constructing extensive oil pipeline infrastructure in Arapahoe County. We anticipate oil pipeline to be in place prior to the commencement of production operations in the Sky Ranch pad. Some tankage and the trucking option are needed in case of any unanticipated pipeline construction delays, as well as to cover any potential future pipeline downtime, but it is on track. Is Crestone using natural gas and diesel engines for completions? Is this what was modeled for Form 2B? The Form 2B emissions estimate calculations assume Tier 4 diesel completion engines. Can Crestone commit to high ozone day BMP since this location is in the ozone non-attainment area? Crestone does commit to high ozone day BMPs through our voluntary program, and we are in our third year of enacting a robust ozone season outreach. Our program includes consistent contact and communication with employees to encourage BMP actions both at work and at home on every day forecasted to have the potential to form ozone. Suggested practices may be to delay personal vehicle fueling, to carpool, to reduce idling, and to delay maintenance activities until late in the evening or early morning. Crestone's parent company, Civitas, has also encouraged our office staff to work remotely when possible 2 days of the work week through the end of the ozone season to reduce commuter traffic. And lastly, the question reads, I'm not sure I'm understanding what commitment there is to recycle produced water. Crestone says it will evaluate whether produced water from this site can be recycled in its operations in the cumulative impacts plan. But in the Form 2B, it reads, given the location near the Sky Ranch residential development, we do not plan to utilize produced water recycle for this location to reduce truck traffic in the area. Please explain what process Crestone will go through to determine viability and when that decision will be made. So in general, in this area, Niobrara horizontal producers, they produce very little water. Oil comes out at a very high cut after initial flowback. The volume produced water from any one site would be inadequate to materially support completions operations in real time. And there are environmental and odor issues with storing produced water, even post-treatment in open storage pits to accumulate sufficient volumes to support a completions job. It's a question of scale at the moment. Additionally, any non-fresh water to be supplied to a completions operation would likely be transported via truck as opposed to our current fresh water, which is supplied via lay flat temporary pipeline. So the use of recycled produced water is not viable at the Sky Ranch location. I appreciate the commissioner's time. I appreciate the staff and all the time they put into this application, and also thanks to the Crestone team for being online today. And with that, we can open it up to questions.
All right, very good. Thank you for the presentation. Commissioner Cross.
Thank you for the presentation. And one of the questions that I had was, I think, partially answered with your presentation there, and I wanted to go into a little bit more detail on that. And that's with respect to the pipeline and kind of where it stands. Do you have any kind of updates on permitting or anything like that with respect to the pipeline and kind of where it stands today?
We are working first on the pipeline route along Powhatan Road to the west. That is ongoing, and we have specific tie-in dates throughout this year and next for tying in our pads, such as the Rush, the Grande, and Eastern Hills. My understanding in the schedule is that Hayes Mount is up after that. We don't yet have specific timeframes other than our midstream group saying it will all be done in time for the development schedule of the Lone Tree, the Sky Ranch, and the Prosper Farms 2-1 pad, which we'll hear so shortly. In terms of permitting, permitting pipeline can be a challenge. Securing right away is the first part of the process. We are moving ahead on that. I don't have the specifics to date, but all signs are that we will have oil connect at the Sky Ranch in time for production start.
Okay. And also one of the things that jumped out to me a little bit, especially seeing the map of the location, you mentioned that the sound wall is going to be on the south side. Is there a reason you chose just the south side? I believe that's where the RBU was within 2,000 feet, but is there a reason you're not going to the east as well with the road to the east?
That road is a 2-lane dirt road that is generally only utilized by those residents and our employees for accessing our oil sites to the south. We do model sound at every pad we permit, and really there's nothing out to the east that would be disturbed by any sound getting out that way. Particularly in the heat of summer, doing a floor wall enclosure of a pad is unpleasant for the workers, and we don't do it if we don't have to.
Thank you. And then my final question was with respect to, you talked about the electric rig being powered by power lines going out there. Has there been any concerns or any discussions with Excel about making sure that there's not going to be any power issues with it being a little bit more of a remote area?
We do. We consult with Excel on a continuous basis, and it is obviously Excel who needs to drop from the power line to install the bipad electrical hookup. My understanding is that in this area, the grid is not particularly taxed, and we're fine. We are powering the Lone Tree pad, which is about a mile south of the Sky Ranch, with electricity and drilling operations, and there's no issues there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Cross. Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for the presentation. I had submitted some questions earlier in the week. It looks like maybe they didn't come through to you guys. So I'm just going to ask them now, and I apologize if I'm catching you a little bit off guard with a couple of these questions. One of my questions is going to be around the oil takeaway via pipeline and the plan for that. And you've explained that for the most part. I did have a question though, that in the cumulative impacts report, it indicates that you will conservatively be utilizing oil takeaway via pipeline within 1 year and have calculated the additional emissions impacts due to trucking away from site for 1 year within the report. And so my question is, because you're putting this in the cumulative impacts report, are you committing to oil pipeline takeaway within 1 year? And if not, then I'm wondering whether that cumulative impacts report should be updated to indicate, permanent trucking until you can commit to that oil takeaway.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. At a high level, when we craft our cumulative impact reports, we always try to err on the pessimistic side. So when you see a year of trucking prior to oil pipeline takeaway, it doesn't mean we intend to truck for a year. It means we'd rather show a higher cumulative impacts and outperform than vice versa, as it were. And I see Kathy Stearman also has some comments here. I'll turn it over to her.
Nothing to add, Dan. Thank you. Kathy Stearman, the manager of air compliance. Thank you, Commissioner, for a question. And I don't have anything to add from what Dan said. We would put our conservative estimates into our 2B that far out, not knowing what we're going to be doing.
Thanks for that answer. I guess the second part of that question is understanding that was a conservative estimate. Can we create a BMP that would require oil takeaway within a year to match that cumulative impacts report? Otherwise, we're approving a permit that essentially says trucking is going to be approved forever without some guarantee that there's going to be oil pipeline takeaway at some point. Certain. I think I formulated that as a question, but I'm not, maybe not.
Yes. Sorry, I've had a moment unmuting there. I think we'd be comfortable with that being P, yes.
Thank you for that. The other question I had, similar question with the produced water. It was a little unclear to me from the application if the produced water was going to be taken away via pipeline, because in the cumulative impacts report, it seems to indicate that it will be, and the associated calculations were based on that. But it wasn't clear from the application whether you're trucking produced water away or if it's coming away via pipeline.
Thank you for your question. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
Thank you for your question, Commissioner Mesner. To answer your question, produced water will be removed from location via truck. There is no produced water takeaway in this general area as it relates to produced water pipelines.
So I wonder if in the cumulative impacts report, then it needs to be updated to indicate that, because unless I'm reading that report incorrectly, it's assuming that it was going to be taken away via pipeline. And so maybe those associated emissions with the trucking of that need to be considered in that cumulative impacts report. Unless I'm reading something wrong in the cumulative impacts report, but it was pretty clear to me that it was anticipated that it was going to be removed via pipeline.
It's my assumption that we assumed produced water takeaway via truck for the life of the project. However, I don't have the cumulative impacts plan in front of me, so I can't answer that definitively, but we can certainly look into that and respond to your question after this hearing.
I'd appreciate that. That's as we look at cumulative impacts, these are important pieces. And so I want to make sure that we get the accurate information. And thank you for clearing up the recycled water piece. I did have a question about that because as I was reading the local government's approval, they seem to think that you were going to be using recycled water at some level in operations based on some of their conditions of approvals on their permits. I didn't see any suggestion that you were going to use recycled water in your application to us, so I was just trying to understand the clarification there. And then I just wanted to make sure that I'm calculating truck trips correctly. Until there's a firm commitment to the oil takeaway via pipeline, and now that it's clear to me that we're looking at removal of produced water via pipeline, is it fair to say, based on 14 trips per day per well at 12 wells that is developed in the transportation plan, that we're looking at about 168 truck trips per day associated with this site until we see oil takeaway via pipeline?
To reiterate the comments, and again, thank you for the question, Commissioner. To reiterate the comments of my colleague, Mr. Harrington, those estimates were overly conservative and assumed, for the purposes of being conservative, that oil pipeline was perhaps ready at the pad a year after we initiated production. Since we now anticipate having pipeline at the pad at the commencement of production from the Sky Ranch location, those truck trips, again, that were originally conservative, will be reduced and limited only to those fluids that we cannot transport via pipe.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation and thanks for answering the questions. So I guess I'm still struggling with the pipeline for takeaway for oil, and it seems unusual in an area where we have quite a bit of activity that it might take up to a year, but you're saying you're trying to commit by the time you commence production. So I'm wondering if we could tighten that up a little bit and figure out what that really looks like and get a commitment from you to have hookup before you start production. Because I think given that we have issues with non-attainment for ozone in this area, and you're not exactly far away from where people live, and truck traffic I think is disruptive and also adds to our ozone issues. I'd love to see a tighter commitment about what's happening with the hookup to the oil pipeline for this particular site. And so I'm just wondering if you can respond to that. I'm also wondering if you didn't have to truck the oil that you could have fewer tanks on this site and reduce the footprint and potential for emissions from tanks.
Thank you for your question, Commissioner McGowan. I may ask Kathy Stearman to address the tank emission component of your question, but I'd like to tackle the pipeline piece first. When this application was submitted almost a year ago, Crestone Peak did not own certain midstream infrastructure in this general area. And so we were wholly reliant on third-party midstream providers to provide service not only for gas takeaway, but also for potential oil pipeline takeaway. Since this application has been submitted, Crestone has actually acquired the asset in this area that provides us the opportunity to move oil via pipeline. And so the timeline, again, that was included in our initial application was set forth based on a series of uncertainties associated with the third-party service provider. Since we now own that infrastructure, although we cannot commit to a date certain, I can tell you that we are committed to producing this location into oil pipeline from the onset. That may not hold a lot of weight with you because I can't commit to a date certain for reasons that have previously been mentioned during this presentation, unknowns associated with pipeline construction, weather events, and so on and so forth. But we are wholly committed to getting this location into oil takeaway as soon as possible. And we anticipate that will occur the date of first production. With that, I'll turn it over to Kathy to answer your question on tank emissions.
Nate, and thank you, Commissioner, for the question. To answer how we calculate emissions on pipeline facilities, going to have two answers. Some facilities have tankless sites, which is where we have a different level of control over the pipeline. And some facilities, even when there's oil takeaway with the pipeline, are still going to have tanks. We might call those a tank light facility, or like you had mentioned, lower count of tanks. However, the way we calculate our emissions and what might go into the Form 2B and even in our air permits is rarely different than whether we have pipeline or not. So it kind of goes back to the truck traffic itself. And that's just by nature of how we calculate our tank emissions. But the second answer to that is we now have new air regulations on the books that really focus on how we maintain our tanks. We have to maintain our thief hatches shut. We have to have either a lease automatic custody transfer or some sort of an auto gauging mechanism that eliminates opening thief hatches these days. And then I'll also mention that I think Sky Ranch will have approximately 24 air monitors in the area, not just the ones surrounding the pad. So that's kind of a long-winded way to answer the question, but there will probably still be tanks even with pipeline.
You'll still, sorry, thank you. You will still need the same number of tanks, even though this original OGDP was written anticipating that you would need the tanks for up to a year. I feel like you would need fewer tanks if you're going to be hooked up to the pipeline.
I can answer that from experience. We have been able to reduce the tank count when pipeline comes to a pad. I've had experience with that, where you may start out with 8 oil tanks and you reduce that to 4. So whether or not that's being considered in the facilities design right now, I can't answer. If you'd like us to come back with that, we can.
I would very much like that. Thank you. I'm wondering if you could also, could we add, I know that you said you're committed to BMPs for ozone for non-attainment, high ozone days. I think there's some language from CDPHE about activities they would like to see operators minimize on high ozone days if and when possible. And so I would like that added as actually added as a BMP to this OGDP, if that's amenable. And I think our staff has some language that we've used previously with other operators.
Commissioner McGowan. Go ahead, Kathy, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. I think we're pretty familiar with those BMPs that go along with ozone mitigation programs. They're kind of an inherent part of our company culture, and they're memorialized in many of our operator agreements, but it is a company-wide policy.
Yeah, and I'm just asking, I would like it to be an actual BMP for your permit. It's not, you don't have it listed. Yeah, I did not see it. If it is.
To that end, Commissioner McGowan, I think we're accepting of that language, provided that if possible, caveat remains, as we have seen from CDPHE and other engagements.
Great, thank you. I'm also, if I'm understanding, and I might be misunderstanding, and maybe Ms. Stearman can respond to this for me. My understanding was that using a mix of natural gas plus diesel engines for completions has fewer emissions than if you're using all diesel engines. And it sounds to me like you guys are choosing tier 4 all diesel. So I'm wondering if you could address that, and especially since we're in a non-attainment area again, if I'm correct or if I'm not correct, or if you could kind of talk about the selection of engines here and type of fuel.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner. The question revolved around what emissions estimates were provided in the Form 2B. So that early out, the consultant did assume a tier 4 straight diesel pump for the completions. If we then add a compressed natural gas or some sort of a fuel blend to the frac, it displaces diesel. So you use less diesel. So your emissions would, it's a tricky question to answer also, because your emissions for what pollutant. So in other words, if you're adding a natural gas fuel blend, you're going to reduce probably your NOx emissions, which feeds into the ozone conversation. You then may have a slightly different impact on your CO2e emissions, your greenhouse gases. So different ways to answer that, but I don't know if I can commit or answer the question right now about whether or not we would be doing a dual fuel blend. I do think it's pretty typical with our frac fleets that that's available.
Thanks, I appreciate that answer. And then I guess my final, this is just a comment. When you put things in one document, such as we're going to look into recycled water, even though I found it unusual because I know there's not a lot of water in this basin, right? As a commissioner, then I have assumption that something is going on, and then I ask a question about it when it's not clear and there's kind of conflicting information in a different document. So if it's not really something that's being contemplated, it would be helpful for me so that I don't ask you something that's not relevant to your OGDP if you don't put it in your application.
Thank you, Commissioner McGowan, and we've certainly noted that. I believe Commissioner Mesner had a similar comment during a prior OGDP hearing as well. The one thing I'll say in this instance is this application was submitted almost a year ago, and so our understanding of what the expectations of staff, but more importantly, you as commissioners are, has certainly evolved since that time. And so in our most recent applications, we've eliminated as much ambiguity in those statements as we can, but thank you very much for the comment.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Further questions for the panel? All right, I'm not seeing further questions. Thank you for taking the questions. We'll now move into Commissioner deliberations. Does anybody desire to initiate deliberations? Commissioner McGowan and then Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the only thing that gives me hesitancy about this particular application is the commitment to hooking up to oil and gas at production time. I think that this is a sophisticated enough operator in an area where there is infrastructure available, and I'd like to see us minimizing footprint and emissions, et cetera, when we're in an area where we're dealing with non-attainment and we're dealing with you are near a population area. This is still Front Range. Understanding that it meets all of the requirements of the permits, but I really am encouraging the operator to figure out how to hook up before they start production. I think that that's appropriate in this location and at this point in time in this area.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really just reiterating what Commissioner McGowan said. Certainly an important part of emissions reduction, wildlife protection, and human health and safety is the reduction of truck traffic. And so I would encourage the applicant to plan their drilling operations a little more closely around the construction and completion of collection systems as well, rather than counting on those on the back end. Would reiterate what Commissioner McGowan said in that if there's a commitment to hook to collection systems at the time of production, I'm much more comfortable with this as well.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Ackerman and Commissioner McGowan. I share similar thoughts. I believe I heard in the testimony today that there is a commitment to connecting to an oil takeaway within 1 year of the commencement of production. Given this particular area and the volume of truck traffic that's anticipated by the transportation plans, that could be up to 168 truck trips a day, understanding the associated emissions with those and the potential cumulative impacts, I'm not sure that that's good enough, to be honest with you. I do think oil takeaway in these front range non-attainment areas that are around population centers, we're looking for the best operations possible, and that includes oil takeaway. And so that is giving me a little bit of heartburn. I mean, there is a commitment for 1 year takeaway. But I mean, I guess I'm curious with other commissioners' thoughts on that. But you know, this continues to be a significant issue, I think. So.
Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I share the concerns with the other commissioners. And that's why one of my first questions about the application was with respect to the pipelines. And I think where I maybe differ from some of the other commissioners is understanding that there is a commitment to hooking up to the pipeline. And to me, that was my biggest question when reading through it initially, understanding that the application came in earlier when it was more of a we're looking into it as opposed to the commitment to it. I think the steps taken by the company to acquire some of those assets to hopefully speed along that process is a good step in trying to make sure that we avoid, minimize, and mitigate. I think that, again, where I differ maybe a little bit than some of the other commissioners is it's hard to understand what kind of control the operator may have in getting all of the necessary approvals from surface owners, getting the necessary permitting approvals to be able to commit to a date certain. And that's why the fact that the operator is committing to a date certain that's a little bit further out, while I prefer for it to be earlier rather than later, I think it's important to take that commitment into account, given kind of the uncontrollable variables that may take place with respect to the pipeline.
Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Commissioner Cross. At the same time, I mean, I do think the operator has the ability to create a date certain based on their drilling schedule, and that they don't have to implement their drilling schedule until there's the certainty that there is going to be oil takeaway, right? So, I mean, there's different schedules that can be created here. One is that you're going to start your drilling schedule and you're going to hope that you get your pipeline in place. The other is you get your pipeline in place and then you commence your drilling schedule. And so I do think that there's options available there for operators. I'm still not sure where I land on this one, but again, I think that the minimization of truck traffic in this particular area and the volume of truck traffic that's going to be anticipated without oil takeaway is significant. And so, you know, I'm continuing to noodle on this one.
Commissioner McGowan and Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if the operator has any thoughts, given what they're hearing from commissioners and whether or not there's an ability to commit sooner than a year.
Thank you for your question, Commissioner McGowan. I'd like to reiterate the fact that in this instance, Crestone does control the midstream infrastructure, and we're not subject to, third-party contractors or third-party vendors, making those well connects. It is extremely difficult, as I mentioned earlier, to commit to a date certain due to circumstances beyond our control. And while I recognize Commissioner Mesner's comments relative to drill schedule or operational schedules, there are things that the company, is bound to or has agreed to with various parties that require, in many instances, the very rigid schedules that we have relative to development projects. Some of that ultimately is informed by permits, both at the state and the local level, as well as other things that are truly beyond our control, including potential supply chain disruptions, as I know y'all have heard about over the last several years relative to this industry. I'm not sure I can offer you the comfort of a date certain that you continue to ask for, but I can assure you that being in control of this infrastructure affords us a much better position than we would have otherwise if we were wholly reliant on a third-party gatherer. With that, I'll ask my teammates if they have any additional information to share.
Mr. Bennett, I'm not seeing, Mr. Harrington, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'll just reiterate the point that coordinating the pipeline construction schedule and the drilling schedule is something we work on an ongoing basis, and it can be the flexibility that we're building into the OGDP here is merely reflecting that, not an intention to not have oil pipeline hooked up in time.
So with that, looking to my fellow commissioners, I believe that the applicant has met the basis of our rules. And I think that this commitment that we're receiving, while not with a firm date, I believe they've established that they're going to do everything they can on that front. And I would encourage my fellow commissioners to, weigh in terms of what part of our rules are potentially not being met that would mandate these additional considerations and thoughts, because I'm struggling on that front. Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that it's an interesting point that you bring up. I do think that our rules would indicate that this is a consideration, that we could have a condition of approval that would require oil takeaway if one of the RBUs was 4 feet closer to the operations. I also would acknowledge that a condition of approval placed on staff on this application indicates that there has to be as-built drawings of this particular application to ensure that they are in fact more than 2,000 feet away from the RBU, because there are additional potential requirements from our rules should it be inside of 2,000 feet. And so while we can argue that 4 feet, does not require the additional analysis of cumulative impacts and emissions associated with truck traffic, it's arguably not directly within our rules to require this. And so what I'm asking is to see if the operator has the ability to commit to that as a best management practice, to be able to show that high level of responsibility for operating within areas that have ozone non-attainment and other aspects to operating within the Front Range communities. I also want to clarify whether or not, I think I heard the operator say that they're committing to oil takeaway within 1 year of production. And then I've also heard say that they're not going to give a date certain. So I guess I just want to confirm that, because if we can say that that it is going to be oil takeaway within 1 year of production, then I can be comfortable with that. If it's not that commitment, then we're essentially creating an open-ended opportunity for truck traffic within our permit. And the operator would not be in violation of their permit if they utilize trucks for 5, 6, 10 years, right? And so I'm just trying to have a little more certainty that there will be that oil takeaway beyond we're going to do everything we can to get there. And so if I could just get an answer on are we talking about oil takeaway within 1 year of production, as is indicated in the cumulative impacts report?
Mr. Bennett?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Mesner. As we stipulated in our cumulative impacts report, there is that 1 year time frame that we have agreed to pursuant to our application.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Or Commissioner McGowan, I'm not sure who I need to recognize next. Go ahead, Commissioner McGowan.
I think just for AAG Mercer. So does that mean that that's enforceable?
You
are
muted.
muted.
Sorry, I'm on my phone and I'm muted both on the computer and on the phone, so I keep forgetting to unmute both. So the commitment, your question, Commissioner McGowan, is the applicant's commitment to connect to oil takeaway within 1 year of production, is that enforceable? Was that the question?
Mm-hmm.
So that certainly can be enforceable. I would recommend for clarity and everyone's purposes to add it as a BMP to this OGDP, and then it will clearly be enforceable.
Okay. I think that's what Commissioner Mesner was suggesting, is adding that as a BMP. Thanks for the clarification.
Sure.
Commissioner, I thought I saw Commissioner Cross had raised his hand, but maybe not. And if not, then Commissioner Ackerman. Commissioner Cross?
And I did, and I just thought I'd quickly comment on the 2 points. So, Mr. Chair, I fully agree. I think that the application as submitted is within our rules, and I don't see anything that causes me any reason to deny the application based on the fact that it's within the rules. I do think that some of the discussions that we've had here, because obviously with this location being in a non-attainment area, it's still important to talk to the operator and make sure that we're taking the steps necessary to work on responsible development and taking the best efforts possible to make sure that we are, especially with the governor's letter yesterday, making sure that we're taking the appropriate steps to try and minimize emissions. That said, as discussed, I think with the BMPs, I proposed both by Ms. McGowan and by Mr. Mesner, that having those in there definitely makes me comfortable with this application. I think that it's important to note that the operator is making efforts to try and take those steps, to not just go with what's in the application, but also go above and beyond and agreeing to BMPs to make sure that we can try and minimize this, even though there are some factors that are beyond their control.
Commissioner Ackerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one point of clarification. We've kind of gone back and forth between takeaway and oil takeaway. Are we talking about oil takeaway commitment within 1 year, and then where does that leave gas takeaway?
I believe they're already committed to cooking to gas, correct?
That is correct. Thank you for the question, Commissioner Ackerman. Crestone has agreed to have gas takeaway at the location and ready for service prior to the commencement of production operations from the Sky Ranch pad.
Follow up, Commissioner Ackerman?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Bennett. I appreciate that, and would also concur that I think this this application falls within the confines of our regulations. I'm comfortable going forward. Appreciate the applicant's continued efforts to ensure that takeaway is in place as soon as possible and hopefully in the future concurrent with completion.
Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate you always bringing us back full circle, you know, what the rules are, you know, what we have authority over. I think also, though, our job as commissioners is to influence A+ work from operators where we know we can get it. And I know that Civitas Crestone is an A+ operator. And so I think that our job is to push a little bit and say, please think about these things when you submit your application. Because even though we're not in charge of non-attainment, CDPHE is, we have to work together with you as industry and with our sister agency to see how we meet these commitments and requirements from state, local, federal government and the goals that we're trying to achieve as a state. And so that's just so you know why I'm constantly pushing and questioning and asking you to do better, to do your best, to hand in A+ work. With that being said, I would be supportive of this application with the BMP for activities on high ozone days and a BMP for a limit of 1 year without using truck or tanks instead of being hooked up to oil takeaway. And I would move that if folks are supportive.
Do I take that as a motion?
Second.
Motion and a second. Do we have further discussion? Let me ask the applicant and or Ms. Mercer. Ms. Jost, are you comfortable in understanding the tenet of the motion as made?
Yes, Chair. Yes, and Commissioner McGowan, thank you for the clarification on the 1 year inclusion into the oil takeaway. That was one question I was going to ask, but yes, we are.
AG Mercer, are you comfortable with the motion as articulated?
I would just like to sort of clarify it for the record. So it's a motion to approve the OGDP application with the addition of 2 BMPs. One is the commitment that the operator will be hooked up to oil takeaway within 1 year of commencement of production. And the second is the operator's agreement to CDPHE's typical, or I'm a little fuzzy on what that language is. I know it's related to ozone non-attainment and it's language that we have used in the past. So perhaps, is there a way to make that a little more clear, Commissioner McGowan, what we're referring to there?
Yes, thank you. So we have had other OGDPs where we have put in this, I guess I will call it PAT language. And it's a commitment for the operator to try to avoid certain activities on high ozone days. Ozone days were, I think, practicable or possible is the language that CDPHE used. And it's activities where you might be releasing things for certain activities or trying to avoid certain activities so that we're part of the solution on those high ozone days. And I can try to find a former OGDP if you want that language, but I'm guessing staff who's worked on these has access to it as well.
Ms. Jones, do you
Yes,
ready to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Commissioner McGowan, we did actually have this language in the Lone Tree OGDP, and if I may offer, Ms. Mercer, I'm happy to send you the language because it does list the specific items that Commissioner McGowan is requesting, as well as the if feasible language that we would ensure needs to be in there for the BMP agreement. So if that pleases the commission, I'm happy to send that information to Ms. Mercer.
That would be great. Yeah, I think as long as the applicant and staff are clear on the language we're talking about, which sounds like there's no reason why we wouldn't be, that's sufficiently clear. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, with those clarifications, Commissioner McGowan, do you stand by your motion? Commissioner Messner, do you stand by your second?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing a nodding of Commissioner Messner, so we've got a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to my fellow commissioners for the discussion and the thoughts. The OGDP approved with the 2 BMPs as articulated.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, commissioners, I'm not seeing anything further on our agenda for today. Does anybody have anything further?
I do not.
Very good. Well, it was a pleasure having our 2 new commissioners participate with us today. Excited about the makeup of the commission as we move forward, and we will see everybody next week. With that, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.